Now, I want to introduce our next speaker, who is neither a hothead nor a goofball. He's one of the most extraordinary people in this movement. And he is a man who works behind the scenes. He does not seek the spotlight. But yet everything that you see around here, everything, is the result of his work, along with the other staffers and the volunteers, and of course, Jean. But I've known Bruce Friedrich for a long time. I have seen him at countless vegan events, animal rights events, always working quietly, often behind the scenes, but doing extraordinary work. What he does here at Farm Sanctuary covers legislation, and it covers litigation. Now that sounds dry, but the fact is that Idaho's ag-gag law was just ruled unconstitutional. And guess whom helped make that happen? Right here. Woo! Stand up. Let's give it to Bruce. That alone. And you know, Bruce. Your name is, it's easy to chant to. It's a good one. Now, I've known you for years, but I didn't realize that you had worked for 2 years as a public school teacher in inner city Baltimore and was named Teacher of the Year. Wow. But even more remarkable, I had no idea that for 6 years you worked at a homeless shelter and a soup kitchen in Washington, D.C. Again, this whole notion that animal activists don't care about people is such a crock. Or put a more positive way, isn't that a wonderful example of how we activists care about people? And of course, for 15 years, you worked very effectively at People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, one of my favorite groups as well. Let's give it up for Bruce Friedrich!
All right, so the title of my talk is Effective Advocacy, Stealing from the Corporate Playbook. And I want to start by polling those of you who are vegetarian or vegan. I think that's the majority of people in the room. Certainly leaving here, I suspect it's the majority of the people in the room. So we're gonna do a gradation of 5. So we're gonna say, and I'm gonna ask you how it feels to be vegetarian or vegan. So we're gonna start with turning this on. We're going to start with turning this on. How do you feel to be vegetarian or vegan? So your first option is you feel really bad. Is anybody like suffering through vegetarianism or veganism? The food is awful. The beer is awful. The speakers are awful. Can't believe I'm here. No, okay. You feel sort of bad about being vegetarian or vegan, but you're making it through. You don't feel that good, but you know it's for the animals, and you're gonna. Anybody? No. Okay. Neutral. Anybody? No. Nobody's neutral. Pretty awesome. There's one more, but pretty awesome is pretty good. Anybody pretty awesome? A few pretty awesome. And how about totally flippin' awesome? Yeah. Of course we feel totally flippin' awesome, right? I mean, every single time we sit down to eat, we're living our values. Every single time we sit down to eat, we're comforting the afflicted and we're afflicting the comfortable. We could be choosing to add to the misery in the world, but we're choosing mercy. We could be adding to the level of cruelty in the world, but we're choosing compassion, and that feels fantastic. Woo! Veganism feels totally flippin' awesome, right? And if you didn't feel totally flippin' awesome before, after Jane gets up here and like jumps around and screams, and it's like, it's gotta rub off on you. She is the best MC. So the point of this talk is to say that activism also feels totally flippin' awesome. So everybody in this room who is vegetarian or vegan, you are withdrawing your support from the suffering of about 35 land animals and probably 3 times that number of sea animals. So every single year, you are not contributing to vast suffering of animals, all of the stuff that we were woken up to in Wayne's presentation yesterday morning. And it feels good not to support that level of suffering. But the thing about advocacy is that each person you influence to change their diet doubles your entire lifetime of not causing suffering. So you have an effective conversation with somebody about veganism, and they adopt a vegan diet, and boom, your entire lifetime as a vegan has just been doubled. If they just give up, eating chickens, that's a huge step. If they even just eat less, if they do meatless Mondays, like the number of animals you're saving is astronomical. So everybody here, if you were walking down the street or driving down the road and you saw, somebody beating a dog on the side of the road, every single person would pull over and start screaming at the person to stop, or you'd call 911, you'd do something to intervene. But the animals on factory farms, the animals in slaughterhouses, are suffering every bit as much as the dog on the side of the road, but it's all happening in these closed-off warehouses. But it's still incumbent upon us as advocates for animals, as people who care, as people who want to make the world a more compassionate place, it's still incumbent upon us that we are active in the world telling people about veganism, telling people about animal rights, and helping people to live up to their better angels. And this presentation is focused on the idea that as we do that, we need to be as effective as possible. Because every interaction that we have with somebody is the opportunity to make a massive positive difference. If it's a lost massive positive difference, the corollary of this is also true. You have the opportunity to do this, but you also have the opportunity to miss that opportunity. So we need to be in our interactions with people as effective as possible. So who here, when you told somebody you believed in animal protection, or you believed in veganism or vegetarianism, the person said, well, what do you think about abortion? Yeah, those of you who are not raising your hands, I think, have not woken up. Because this is extraordinarily common. Or where do you get your protein? Yeah. Or, wait a minute, the plants feel plain. What about the screaming broccoli? Right? I mean, that really, when you have conversations with people about being a vegetarian or a vegan, there are about 9 comments or questions that represent about 95% of what people will say to you. And we owe it to animals, we owe it to our desire to make the world a better place, not to be winging it when we get into these situations. We owe it to animals to have whatever we consider to be practiced responses, because each conversation that you have with somebody who is not vegetarian or vegan is an opportunity to do massive good in the world. Again, we're all really excited about being vegetarians or vegans, and we should be, but every conversation is the opportunity to double that ebullient feeling. So does anybody know what this is? It's either Harvard either Harvard Medical School or it's Harvard Law School. It's whichever one this isn't. I think this is Harvard Law School and this may be Harvard Medical School. And the point of these slides is that people who want to go into business, they want to sell widgets or t-shirts or whatever it is that they want to sell, people who want to be lawyers, they go to school, they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, they spend endless hours studying in order to get good at being capitalists, basically. We as animal advocates need to spend at least some time figuring out how we can be as good as possible as animal advocates. We can't be in a situation in which we're doing anything, in which the next thing comes and the next thing comes. Anybody in here who is on an animal protection email list knows that you could do nothing else other than respond to the emails that in the subject line, they say, make this the one thing you do today. But there are like 50 of those every single day. You could do nothing but that. But we owe it to animals to study and to become as effective as possible and to do the things that are going to be as effective as possible as we are the animal's voice. So I highly recommend these 3 books. I would guess, and I think it's probably true, that 98 to 99% of people who have gone to business school, 98 to 90% of people who are top executives have read these 3 books. And I know you say this in a room of progressives or a room of animal rights activists, and the titles kind of like some people break out in hives in the audience. But How to Win Friends and Influence People and The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, they're still on the New York Times top 20 bestseller list. How to Win Friends and Influence People was at number 9 last week. And that's, it came out more than 50 years ago. And it really could be retitled. It could be something like, all that stuff your mom told you about being a good person and listening to other people and, not talking all the time and hogging the spotlight, all that stuff is true. Like, that's basically what it's about. It probably wouldn't sell as well. Amazon would need an entire page just for the title. But it's a quick read, and it's really quite good. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and Getting Things Done. Getting Things Done, the art of stress-free productivity. I don't think, in the world of email and text messaging and everything else that there is stress-free productivity. But Getting Things Done really does do, and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, especially if you're like me and you sometimes get to the end of the day and it's been incredibly busy and it's, you've gone full stop the entire day. And then somebody says, how was your day? And you're like, oh man, it was hectic. And they say, well, what did you do? I don't know. I know I was busy. I know I didn't take lunch. But there's nothing you can sort of tick off. These books help you to prioritize and figure out how to get past that. There are a couple of books that attempt to distill these and a few other books in terms of that are written primarily for animal advocates. One of them is mine that I wrote with Matt Ball, who is Farm Sanctuary's manager of engagement. The other one is Change of Heart by Nick Cooney. Ingrid Newkirk says about Change of Heart should be mandatory reading for everyone with a good cause and a good heart. You might want to start with these 3 books, or you could start with these 2 and then go to these 3. But I agree with that. Then Matt's in my book. Animal liberation author Peter Singer said, rarely have so few pages contained so much intelligence and good advice. Get it, read it, and act on it now. I got that blurb from Peter Singer, and I figured I could retire. It's all downhill after that. But I hope he's right. I am going to give you 9 things that Matt and I talk about in the book, the sort of 9 things that fit into 40 minutes that we think are most important. And I will say also that this book is sort of it's on the basis of decades of doing things wrong. And I used to give a presentation sort of like this when I was at PETA for these Speaking Up for Animals conferences that we would do. And these 9 tips have come out of a lot of discussion. And I'm in no way attempting to sort of lay down the law on these things. I'm happy to have discussions with you on any of these points. Some of them are a little controversial. Take what's useful to you and leave what's not. But the most important thing, I think, is that we don't ask what can we justify, and we don't even ask what's right. We ask, if I were an animal in a gestation crate, unable to turn around for my entire life, how would I want advocates on my behalf to behave? So some of the things that I'm going to discuss are a little counterintuitive. Some of them may not feel perfectly right. I'll attempt in the limited time that we have to explain why I think they are right. We go into them more in the book, and I'm happy to have conversations with anybody who disagrees. The first one is to do the little things. So if you have a car, or you have a laptop, or you own a body, when you go out into the world, be an ambassador for animal rights, for vegetarianism. If you currently have a Minnesota Timberwolves shirt, or an I'm with Stupid shirt, or an Abercrombie and Fitch shirt, Stupid and the Timberwolves and Abercrombie and Fitch, they don't need you to advertise them. They are going to be fine or not fine, regardless. But if you're wearing an Ask Me Why I'm Vegetarian shirt, or a Happy Vegetarian shirt, or a Joyful Vegan shirt, or a Farm Sanctuary shirt, people will ask you about it. every time somebody sees it, it's a little positive impression that helps to normalize the idea of vegetarianism and the idea of veganism. If you've got one that invites conversation, like I love the one that Susie showed yesterday, What Kind of Asshole Eats a Lamb? And it's got this pretty lamb on it, so people see the pretty lamb, and then they go like this. And it's an opportunity to like make eye contact and go, right? You know, which has happened to me literally 20 times since Susie gave me that shirt. But so shirts, bumper stickers on laptops. If you're a good activist and you've got the bumper sticker on your laptop and somebody like says, hey, cool bumper sticker or whatever, you know, then you whip out your vegetarian starter kit from your bag because you've got a stash of them. So you're a good animal activist. That also has happened to me many times. And it's, you know, little opportunities that can, again, make a big difference. So this one is probably the first of the sort of counterintuitive ones. My wife Alka and I go out on the streets leafleting with some regularity, and occasionally, those of you who've been to demonstrations or been leafleting know, occasionally people don't react kindly to simply being offered a leaflet. It's like, you know, their sister-in-law was vegan. She threw away their toothpaste. They didn't think they could say anything to the sister-in-law, so you offer them a vegan leaflet, and they're going to take out their, you know, toothpaste in the trash on you, right? And they'll be unkind to you. And it used to be that I would be unkind back. You know, my favorite is, you know, you're in Georgetown on a Saturday night with the Meet Your Meat video, and you're showing people the video, and you're passing out literature, and some drunk guy tells you off, you know, why don't you do something useful with your life? And I would say, like, stumbling drunk on a Saturday night out of a... And that made me feel good, right? I told him. But from the animal's perspective, it was counterproductive at best. I had some opportunity to influence that person, maybe not, but some opportunity. But I guarantee that when that person, somebody says, hey, you know, I'm vegetarian or I'm vegan, he's going to say, I met this jerk in Georgetown who, like, cussed at me. And he's not going to share, I was a jerk to this guy, and he's just going to say, animal rights people are nasty and judgmental. So even if it's Frankenstein coming down out of the castle, you are the Boy Scout. Excuse me, sir, but you look a little lost. Perhaps I can be of some assistance. The second one, and Melanie talked about this a little bit as well, we don't need to be apologetic about not consuming tortured animals, right? I mean, you know, in society, carnism is the norm, but not causing suffering makes a lot more sense than causing suffering. So you may be at a dinner table, and somebody will say, why aren't you eating, you know, grandma's turkey or whatever else? And I will say, it makes sense in a situation like that. You can justify, you can rationalize, you could write a thesis paper on why it would make sense to just like pick up the table, turn the table over, you brood of animal killers, right? There's a tortured corpse, you know. If they were sitting there like physically beating the animal, which may well have happened, you would do that. But from the animal's perspective, that is counterproductive because the people won't understand it. They'll think you're nuts. So you may not want to get into a heated debate over a turkey corpse, but you should have something to say along the lines of, and you know, this is what I say, and you know, you can use this or something else, but something like, I think if you saw how this animal suffered, you wouldn't support it. You know, I don't want to dominate the dinner conversation. I would love to talk to anybody here later about this, and I'd love to give you some literature. But I just see no difference between eating, you know, this abused animal, and if they have a dog or a cat or something, extra credit for saying, you know, and like eating the dog or the cat. But let's talk about it later. And this does a few things. It raises the moral issue. You're not being apologetic because you shouldn't be apologetic. And all of the people who were suddenly cringing, thinking that you were going to come to fisticuffs with Uncle Phil, you know, they see you as the good guy in the situation. You've said what you wanted to say, but it's not going to turn into some heated argument. So you are Mahatma Gandhi, you are Dorothy Day. You know, casting our lot on behalf of compassion is not something that we should be apologetic about. Also counterintuitive, and counterproductive in my opinion, is placing personal purity ahead of efficacy. So I know that oftentimes, we learn that gelatin comes from an animal. We learn that monosodium glutamate may come from an animal. It may come from a vegetable. We learn that some beers are processed using animal parts. And you go to the animal rights conference, and the people in the bar, you're vegan. Here are the beers you can consume. And there are two problems with this. The first is that pretty much everything, does anybody here eat exclusively veganic food? Okay, there are a couple people who eat exclusively veganic food. In Washington, D.C., you couldn't do it. Does anybody here eat exclusively organic food? Few people eat exclusively organic food. There are animal products involved in probably everybody here eats organic food occasionally. Organic food involves animal fertilizer. So it's every bit as not vegan as the not vegan beer. All of the non-organic food involves pesticides and herbicides, which means that in addition to insect holocaust, there are also a fair amount of small mammals and birds who die. So veganism is not about being personally pure. And if we try to make it about being personally pure, it becomes that much harder to accomplish. So it's useful to think about the numbers. I said that the average American meat eater consumes about 35 land animals and probably more than 100 sea animals. They measure sea animals by tonnage, so we don't know. But if you break that down animal by animal, you eat more than 30, the average American meat eater eats more than 30 birds. They eat a third of a pig, a tenth of a cow, and are responsible for about a 30th of a dairy cow. So if we turn veganism into something where you're at a dinner table and you're like, I can't eat that because, the monosodium glutamate might have come from dairy, everything we consume causes some suffering. Nobody can be perfectly pure. Veganism is about minimizing our contribution to that suffering. But if you make veganism seem like a cult, or you make it seem like an ingredient list, or you make it seem impossible, where you might have gotten somebody to stop eating birds in order to get 1 gazillionth of an animal product out of your diet, you've just stopped that from happening, which I think is both, not as thoughtful as it should be, and also counterproductive to getting to animal liberation. The second purity versus efficacy thing is eating with meat eaters. And if you are the type of vegan or vegetarian where if you sit at a table with meat eaters and there's that corpse on the table, it's going to cause you to break down, it's going to be just awful for you, then by all means don't eat with meat eaters. But for me, so I've been vegan for 28 years this month, and thank you. And for about the first 10 years, I refused to eat with meat eaters. When I would go to the family gatherings in Minnesota, I would eat someplace else. I wouldn't be there when they were having the Thanksgiving meal or the Christmas meal or whatever it was. And if you Google table fellowship, or eating with friends, there are 19 million of this photo. People value sitting around the table with other people and breaking bread together. It's really important. And if they see veganism as you can't do this, and they see veganism, it comes across as a cult, and you lose the opportunity to do some good vegan evangelism. So in my first however many years, roughly a decade of not eating with meat eaters, none of my relatives adopted a vegetarian or a vegan diet. I didn't have useful conversations with them. It was like this thing we don't want to talk about because it's, he's a Moonie. Now, we go to the meals, we bring fantastic vegan food, we have conversations with people about it, and I have a bunch of cousins who have gone vegan as a result. Not eating with meat eaters is the opposite of normalizing veganism and normalizing animal rights, in my opinion. If you've got it, use it. So when I first started talking about this 15 years ago, and I would say, who here has been vegetarian or vegan for their entire life? There'd be one person in the room, but I'll bet we've got more than that. Who's been vegetarian or vegan their entire life? So a few more. That is so awesome. I love that. Most of us had to learn. You know, Carol Adams, I love this. She calls meat eaters blocked vegans. They just haven't learned yet how to align their values and their actions. And so most of us started off meat eaters, and somebody educated us, and we learned about veganism, and we adopted a vegan diet. If you only date other vegans, you're eliminating a lot of people. This is also a pretty good evaluative standard, right? If you meet somebody, how they deal with the fact that you're vegan will tell you a lot about them. So don't go to VeggieDate, go to Match.com, put up your profile, find a meat eater, date them, convert them to veganism, drop them. Repeat. So this one is also counterintuitive. I don't know how many people here remember Gene McCarthy and all the hippies who turned up in 1968 or 72 to canvass for Gene McCarthy, and they had the slogan, "Go clean for Gene." All of the hippies, cut off their hair and turned in their tie-dyes for long-sleeve shirts. And this is horrible, because ism is an ism. Like, bias on the basis of how you look is an ism, just like racism or sexism or other isms. And if how you look is essential to who you are, I would absolutely not advocate that you change how you look. But I can tell you that when I was going for the Jesus vibe, it wasn't essential to who I was. It was sort of, it was something that I was running a homeless shelter and a soup kitchen, and was living in voluntary poverty, and was taking the idea of Christianity seriously to the point at which I wanted to look like Jesus. And I was vegan at the time, and I would have conversations with people, and you really can tell a difference in terms of whether people are listening to you. And I know that, so if you were at a red light and the light turned green and you were sitting behind a VW Bug or a Lexus, how many people here would wait longer to honk at the Lexus as opposed to the VW Bug? Nobody? Okay, a few people actually raise their hands. You're very self-aware. Over 80% of people, over and over and over in studies, even the people in the VW Bug, even the people in the beater cars, there's no difference. Like, in society, what people look like, unfortunately, it matters. And a lot of people make their decision about whether they are going to trust you, whether they are going to believe you, whether what you say comes with authority on the basis of what you look like. And Nick and I both talk a fair bit about this in our books. And I will say, it is just true that now that I look like I want to draft George W. Bush to run again for president, even people who look like I, used to look, take me more seriously. So hideously unfortunate, and yet, if we want to be as effective as possible for animals, I'm not sure that putting our desire, to look like Jesus on the back burner to help animals doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The two most important points, I think, are coming up. And this one, I think, is probably at least as important as the next one. And this is to channel Socrates, to have conversations with people rather than to sort of beat people into seeing things from our perspective. So, as a lot of the speakers have made clear, we're not trying to win an argument with the meat eater. We're trying to help people to align the ethics that they already have with their actions. So that Gallup poll that Wayne was talking about yesterday also showed that 96% of Americans want to see animals legally protected from abuse. Yeah. 96% of Americans don't agree on anything, right? Even the libertarians want to see animals protected from abuse, but they don't know what's happening. So our goal is simply to help people to align the ethics that they already have. They don't support cruelty, with the fact that if they're sitting down and eating meat, they're supporting cruelty. And that's the conversations I think we need to have. So I do debates at college and university campuses. So I go to the schools and I debate the debate team. And this is one of the slides that I use. And I say, who here would be willing to eat Rena Ray, the cat in the upper left-hand corner? And because there are a bunch of versions of this debate online, sometimes the debate team has watched in preparation, and so there'll be some people in the audience who, with beef it's what's for dinner caps on, and they'll raise their hands. But for the most part, people are not in society willing to eat a cat. Who here would be willing to eat Chompers, the cute little dog in the lower right-hand corner? Yeah, nobody. And yet, in a room full, of people who came to hear the debate team slaughter the animal rights guy, it's a lot of people, but nobody is willing to eat the cat or the dog, and yet all of them are willing to eat Beaky or Fiona, the chicken or the pig. And yet nobody can come up with anything approximating a tenable explanation for how it's different to eat Rena as opposed to Beaky, to eat Fiona as opposed to Chompers. God, she's beautiful. Look at those eyes, right? That's Angela Davis, Rena Ray, and Tigger the only one. They are watching you. The science on this is irrefutable. What we know to be true is that at least mammals, birds, and finfish, they feel pain in the same way, and they feel pain to the same degree. They have the same 5 physiological senses. They're made of the same stuff, flesh and blood and bone, causing some animals to suffer and not other animals. There's simply nothing approximating a rational explanation for it. With regard to chickens in terms of intelligence, which is what people generally come back to, so we all know that it shouldn't matter, right? If what you're talking about is a being's right to be free from pain or suffering, the only morally relevant variable is that being's capacity to feel pain, that being's capacity to suffer. And yet we know that for a lot of people, if you actually have the conversation with them, they somehow come up with a way to say that chickens or pigs or other animals are somehow lesser. And it usually boils down to the idea of individuality or cognitive sophistication. And so it's interesting, to me at least, that what we now know to be true is that chickens and pigs outperform dogs and cats on ethological tests. So tests of emotion and behavior and cognition. Chickens and pigs are more cognitively, emotionally, and behaviorally sophisticated than dogs and cats. My wife insists that the cats are refusing to participate. They could destroy the chickens and the pigs if they wanted to. But the dogs are trying. So a few of the more interesting pieces of research. Chickens can delay gratification, which human babies get at about the age of 4. And where all chickens can delay gratification, a lot of human babies don't get it by the age of 4. So a scientist at the University of Bristol said, chickens are actually smarter than toddlers. Chickens know that a hidden object exists, even though it's hidden, which human babies get at a little over the age of 1. One of my favorite headlines in the New York Times, it was in the Sunday New York Times by Nicholas Kristof. "Hold the drumstick. That's an intellectual you're eating." Oh my God. And it had to do with the research that I was just talking about. Then he also had Are Chicks Brighter Than Babies, which was the title of his blog that day, on the basis of the research that I was just talking about. At Farm Sanctuary, we've distilled all of the ethology that exists. Unfortunately, it's not very much having to do with farm animals. And we've got it up in the education section of farmsanctuary.org. If you scroll down, you'll get to someone, not something, and we've got it all there. But this is 50,000 broilers in a shed, and each animal has about, it looks like a carpet of chickens, right? And each one has about that much space for her or his entire life. University of Arkansas researchers said that because chickens are genetically bred to grow so quickly, if a human baby grew at the same rate as a modern broiler chicken, by the age she was of 2 months, she would weigh 660 pounds. And it's no different to put chickens through that sort of torment than it would be to put dogs or cats through that sort of torment. And that's the conversation that I try to have now. This shirt says, Percy Shelley is my homeboy. Percy Shelley, in explaining his vegetarianism, he said, I want no part of anything I can't write a pleasant poem about. I can't write a pleasant poem about anything. I'm not a poet. But I like that concept. And so now, when somebody would say, why are you a vegetarian? And I would be so excited that somebody wanted to hear from me why I'm a vegetarian. And I would ram it down their throats. So they'd say, why are you a vegetarian? I would say, thank you for asking. Chickens on factory farms, they cram 50,000 of them in massive sheds. They have that much space. They bred and they drug. They grow so quickly, they're literally keeling over, and then they cram 6,000 to 9,000 on the back of a truck, and they ship the truck to the slaughterhouse, and they snap the animal. And the moment I take a breath, the person is running away as fast as they can go. And that works for some people, right? Some people just need to hear it, and they've never heard it. But what works a lot better is having a conversation with people. So now somebody says, are you a vegetarian? And I say, they say, why are you a vegetarian? Because I've got the shirt that says, ask me why I'm vegetarian. They know, they don't have to ask. So they say, why are you vegetarian? Which happens a lot when you're wearing that shirt. It's fantastic. And so they say, why are you a vegetarian? I say, thank you for asking. Are you a vegetarian? Which is a really useful thing for me to know going into that conversation. Are we swapping vegetarian war stories here? Or is this a really important conversation? And almost nobody who is vegetarian asks, which is interesting. It's almost always people who are not vegetarian. And I say, really, why not? Which is so satisfying. And, it's sort of like, wait, I asked you the question, now you're asking me the, and they look sort of taken aback. And people haven't thought about it. And it's useful to get people to think about it and to have a conversation wherein you know what it is they're thinking about why they're not vegetarian. And then you have a conversation with them that I try to get back to Shelley's idea, which in non-poetic terms, to me, means integrity. So very few people in society are willing to slice animals' throats open. We saw that some people are with Timothy's presentation yesterday. But I've asked, I've now had this conversation literally hundreds of times. When I say, would you be willing to spend an afternoon slicing animals' throats open? So far nobody's said yes. Sometimes you'll end up talking to a hunter and they'll say, I hunt. And I'm like, okay, so you hunt, so you actually take responsibility for the animal you're killing, but what do you think a slaughterhouse looks like? And even my uncles and cousins who hunt are horrified by the idea of spending time in a slaughterhouse. So would you want to do that? No, they wouldn't want to do that. Most people don't want to do it. They don't want to see it. They don't even want to think about it. They're uncomfortable having a conversation about slitting animals' throats open. So then where is the basic integrity in paying other people to do something that at brass tacks, they're morally opposed to it? So having a conversation with people about what's happening on modern farms, what's happening in slaughterhouses, would you eat a dog? No, why not? Most people haven't thought about it, and these sorts of conversations will be a lot more effective when that person goes back and, they're looking at the menu and they're trying to figure out what they're going to eat. They'll actually remember the conversation if it's a conversation rather than if it's, a sort of data dump, my brain to their brain. And I think for me at least, that's been the thing that has really transformed my method of interacting with people in a way that I think is far more effective than probably any of the other suggestions. The last thing I want to talk about, though, And I know other speakers have also talked about it, but I think we cannot reinforce this enough, because when we leave here and we go out into society, it will oftentimes feel like we're not winning. But we are winning. So yay for you. I find it remarkable that there's a photo of this. Headquarters, National Association Opposed to Women's Suffrage. So, Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living 2,500 years ago. And really all philosophy since has sort of been commentary on that concept. Nevertheless, for 2,350 years after Socrates said that, in polite society, it was considered completely normal that humans would hold other humans as slaves. You know, we passed the 13th Amendment in 1865, less than 150 years ago. Women did not have a say in governance. We passed the 19th Amendment in 1920, so less than 100 years ago. And at that point, there was a spirited debate in Congress about whether the Union would dissolve if these irrational creatures, most of y'all, if you were given a say in governance. And as Peter Singer says in Animal Liberation, the challenge is not to say, you know, what were our great-grandfathers and our great-great-grandfathers and great-great-grandmothers doing that was morally indefensible? It's really easy to say, gosh, I can't believe 150 years ago they had slaves. Gosh, I can't believe women didn't have a say in federal elections 100 years ago, or whatever else. The challenge is to say what's happening right now that in 50 or 100 years, people are going to look back on with that same sort of moral disdain, incredulity, and outrage. And I'm convinced with Leonardo da Vinci that we will get to a point in the not too distant future where we look back on causing animals to suffer for such inconsequential things like a palate preference with that same sort of moral outrage. Because just like the isms of slavery, well, that's not an ism, but just like racism, sexism, homophobia, misogyny, all of these other isms are both ethically and scientifically indefensible, so too speciesism is scientifically and ethically indefensible. And we're going to get there a lot more quickly if we all recognize that our interactions with people matter, that we have tremendous power, and if we're all being as effective as we can be, as vocal as we can be, and as strong as we can be on behalf of animals, because advocacy feels totally flippin' awesome. We're doing it for her. We're doing it for her. Their friends are counting on us. Thank you.